All right. Hello, Professor Grenier. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. How are you, Ahmed?
I'm doing well. Doing well. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And we'll just start off with the interview. First question is just to share maybe some of your interests outside of the class.
Well, outside of class, I'm also a system engineer. I work for the Department of Defense as a contractor, and I've been doing that ever since I retired from active duty. I served 25 years in the U.S. Air Force. I retired in 2007, and I've been working as a contractor ever since. So, uh, I mean, that's kind of like my day job. And then at night, I'm an adjunct professor.
Okay. Can you tell us a little more about your path? So you said that you're in the Air Force for 25 years.
Right. Well, I joined the Air Force in 1982. I retired in 2007. I was a colonel when I retired. I was a navigator on B-52 bombers. And then I went from the B-52 to the B-1 bomber. And I flew that until 1995. And then I got into test and evaluation, where I looked at new weapon systems, new software, that sort of thing. And when I retired, that's what I was doing. I was testing new weapons and new systems.
Okay. Pretty cool.
It was fun. I never thought that I had a job. I never looked at it like work. It was a profession. It was a calling. I had a lot of fun.
What did you do before the Air Force?
Well, I was an arts administrator.
Okay.
My undergraduate degree is in philosophy, and when I graduated, I had a very strong interest in bringing arts in a hands-on way to kids. So I joined a nonprofit organization to bring art programs to children in city parks in upstate New York. So I became a program manager for a very small program that was state and federally funded to bring hands-on art programs to kids in parks. And I did that for a few years. But I felt at the time that, and I also worked for the New York State Museum as
Okay.
a sort of a guide for the museum. But all through that, all through these years after college, I felt I really wanted more of a challenge.
Okay.
And I'd always thought about the military as representing a challenge for myself. So I did. I took the plunge. I joined the Air Force in 1982 after a few years being on my own after college.
Okay. Excellent. So, in terms of just like some of the skills that you picked up, what would you, if a student was looking to go into the Air Force, what are some of the skills that you would say that the most important skills to you that you picked up through that?
This is going to sound strange, but typing, being able to be very good at internet skills and computer skills. I mean, believe it or not, I go way back, and I took typing in high school. And believe it or not, that one skill has made me, had catapulted, propelled me to be good with computers. And so I know a lot of kids today are already good with computers, so that they're digital natives, whereas I was a digital immigrant. So uh, that's just a side, but really it's discipline and drive. If you're really determined to do something and you really have a lot of motivation to do it, then that's what's key.
Okay.
I was very motivated when I joined the Air Force because I was looking for a challenge. I was looking for something that was outside of my comfort zone. And I was very, very excited about doing some things and to learning some skills that uh, before that I had not been exposed to. So I was willing to accept the kind of discipline that comes along with a military career. And if you're willing to have some discipline in your life and the determination and motivation to succeed, then you can go very far.
Excellent. Um, so that kind of ties into the advice for students. But I would say one piece of advice for students in the classroom to succeed, and then one piece of advice for students outside the classroom.
Inside the classroom, in my mind, it's keeping up, the discipline to keep up with the course. I know in my own personal experience, when I have fallen behind, in coursework, it's very difficult to catch up, very difficult to make up lost ground. So to me, discipline is a very useful skill, and I think it's good advice for any student. And everybody has to accept information and take classes that they may not be totally interested in. You might have curriculum requirements. This particular course may be required. This particular course may not be required. No matter what, my best advice is to find something about that information that is interesting to you. Even if, a lot of my students say, I hated politics and political science. I never had an interest in that. And then they find out that, well, perhaps there might be something in their life that was all about politics and all about political science that they didn't know about before. So give things a chance and find something in each course and in each class that connects with you on a personal level. Outside of the classroom, my best advice is to try to, I hate this word, but legislate your time. In other words, keep your time in control. Everyone, think about this. The President of the United States, Barack Obama, has just as many hours in the day as you do as a student, just as many hours. And think of what the President might be able to accomplish in his hours versus what you're accomplishing in your hours. So legislate your time, control your time, and be disciplined about it. And you will succeed, and you're going to be a lot happier, and there'll be a lot less stress in your life, particularly when assignments become due.
Okay, those are really, really good pieces of advice, and things that, especially for the when you talk about intro classes, they're all broad, so you can always find something that you're interested in, pretty much in any intro class. What is the toughest part for you about being a professor?
I really agonize over grades. When I'm looking at, I have a system when I'm grading papers. I have a system when I'm grading essays, midterms, finals, and so forth. And those systems usually involve rubrics, and a rubric is nothing more than a criteria that I'm using to arrive at a grade. A rubric is important because it means that my grade for student A will be fair with regard to student B. I really agonize over that because what I'm looking for is my own intuition that a student really knows the material. And sometimes, one student might be a little bit different in how they describe their own knowledge than another student. And I have to try to differentiate between students to try to arrive at a fair grade. It's not cookie cutter, and it's not automatic. I don't come up with a grade by just applying a formula. It's just not that simple. So I agonize over that, and I spend a lot of time with it because I want to be as fair as possible for those that have spent the time and really put out the effort to do a good job on an assignment. But also I want to make sure that I don't short sheet or not give credit where credit is due for somebody who made a big effort and maybe wasn't as eloquent as another student, but they really do know the material. So I have to really read it and read through it a few times to make sure I'm fair in my grades. But that's the hardest thing, is assigning a grade, no question.
Okay. Would you just say that it's just an experience thing, or you just get better and better over time?
That's exactly right. When I first started out, I tried to be as, not robotic, but as formula-driven as possible because I wasn't sure exactly, how to assess necessarily. And it does take time. You have to see a lot of students to understand the different learning styles. In education, we talk about learning styles and we talk about Bloom's taxonomy and all that sort of thing. It's very true that different students with different learning styles are going to produce differently but they may have the knowledge that I'm really looking to assess. I always have to keep in mind that what I'm trying to get at is what I think the student has taken away from the course. And that's the hardest thing to arrive at, really.
I hear that a lot with professors.
Hmm.
Grading seems like it's not as simple as people may think.
Right, right.
So on the other end of things, then what would be your favorite part about being a professor?
Oh, there's no question, and that is standing in front of a group of students and listening to their ideas, their discussion, their questions. I love that. I absolutely love that, and that's what brings me back every time. I have a great deal of respect for the amount of effort that students put into their courses, into their assignments. And in my case, since I'm an adjunct professor and I teach at night, most of my students have other things on their plate. They've got family situations, they've got maybe a day job, a career that they're also pursuing. They have families, they have lots of demands on their time. And for them to come forward and be a student, just be a student, is a big achievement. I have a great deal of respect for that. So when I stand in front of a group of students and listen to them, I always keep that in mind, that these folks have probably had a long day already, particularly if it's 8 o'clock at night. And I try to be cognizant of that and try to be sensitive to that. I love the discussions, and I really appreciate the kind of time that goes into the thought that my students bring to the class. And I always learn something new. So the next group of students is going to benefit from the current group of students. That doesn't help the current group of students, but I always have something new to introduce to the next class.
Awesome. So are there specific techniques that you use to facilitate discussion, or?
Well, I've tried various things, and I'm still evolving in that. Leading questions and trying to introduce new examples. That's the thing that usually generates good discussions, by talking about an example. I try to take some things from my own life, my own life experiences, my own personal experience with politics, for example, taxes or something else like that. And getting a discussion going, sometimes it does depend on the class, because there's a dynamic within a classroom. Sometimes there might be students that enjoy discussion and talk a lot, and that may sort of crowd out other students who may be a little bit hesitant to jump in. I've tried to provide an avenue for students that are just naturally reticent by allowing online discussion board type activity. And so that's one way I can do to provide an outlet or an avenue for students that are not good on an interpersonal basis. I'm also toying with the idea of using certain constructs like a jigsaw puzzle, a jigsaw group type activity, where you divide the classroom up into smaller groups. Then you have the groups exchange and go back and forth between groups. I've tried that before, and it's good because it gets everybody talking. The entire class will begin to discuss. The problem with that is it takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of setup involved, and that takes away from the material that I can present during class. So one thing I don't do that I'm considering doing maybe in the future, and that is calling on students. Normally in a discussion, particularly with politics, I like volunteerism. I like students to volunteer answers and volunteer discussion. But sometimes that doesn't cut it, and I may have to begin to ask students for answers, or just to prompt a student to discuss something. And so I'm thinking about doing that maybe in the future.
Okay. What would you say is the biggest problem with public education?
It depends if we're talking about secondary, higher ed. There's different sets of problems, I think, across the board. Today, for higher education, I think cost is a huge factor, a very big factor. The ability of a graduate of a four-year institution to get a job is also a big deal. A recent study on two-year schools has shown that two-year colleges, graduates of two-year colleges with either an Associate of Applied Sciences or an associate degree are making more money than four-year students, which goes to show you that the job market out there is getting very particular and getting very focused. So being able to graduate from a two or a four-year institution, getting a job is a big deal. And tailoring the kind of information and the kind of degrees that we pump out of a university, I think is going to be important. Figuring out what the job market is out there and how to tailor our curriculums to meet that job market. Now, obviously, schools can't always do that. You know, you have to have certain criteria, certain standards. But in higher education, we have to realize that students are going to have to get a job, you know, and they're going to need to use their degree. Another thing that I think is huge right now is massive open online courses. They're called MOOCs. There's a big drive right now for students to be able to take a course for free. You know, going online, say a course that's offered at Stanford or Harvard or some other very prestigious school, and taking a course online for free as part of a massive open online course, and then getting some kind of credit for it that may not be good for your four-year degree, but maybe can be used in some other fashion, you know, and be acknowledged. I think that's the future. The future is that education is going to become mobile. It already is mobile, but it's going to become distributed and mobile, and some hope less costly. Secondary has a whole different set of problems. I think one of the problems with secondary education, and to a certain extent higher education, is that we have a cultural problem in our educational system. And that cultural problem is that the value of education has changed over time. And depending upon what culture you come from, you may have a different view of the value of your education. And therefore, whether or not you continue with your education or put that much emphasis on it, it depends on where you come from. So I think that's a problem we have to deal with. And, you know, a one-size-fits-all educational system is not going to be able to differentiate that, not going to be able to address those different motivations and cultures. So,
do you think that with the integration of online courses that will increase the value of education to the average American?
I do. I think definitely, because access is going to be a little bit more easy to achieve. I'm interested in mobile learning, M-learning as it's called. And if I can access my educational content anytime, anywhere, then that makes it easier for me and it makes it more accessible to me. So if I have a handheld device and I can access my content in a totally untethered way, I don't have to sit at my desktop. I don't even have to have my laptop. I can use my mobile phone. Then that gives me more opportunity, more flexibility. So I think the online environment is going to explode the access to education. What remains to be seen is, well, how do you pay for the other end of it? How do you pay the professors in the schools, and how do you pay for that? Good question.
Yeah, it seems like there will be a lot of adjustments with that, but from a student perspective, that makes the most sense to me. Just in terms of accessibility, flexibility with your schedule, a lot easier for you to then work while you're going to school, making pay for it easier, and then if it's cheaper. But there are definitely still gaps that people are working on right now. But it'll be interesting to see where it goes, though.
Yes, and it is right now. They are trying to overcome some technological barriers to having access to most course materials. And that's on the other end of it. We can't treat the mobile environment or the online environment like the face-to-face environment. So we can't design a course with face-to-face in mind when it's going to be presented online or in a mobile environment. We have to think of it in terms of where it's going to be presented. Just like websites have to have an app that is suitable for the mobile device, schools have to have an app that is suitable for the mobile device as well. And most schools do, but it's just that the functionality of those applications are not comprehensive yet.
Okay. So we're kind of these will be kind of like bonus questions.
Okay.
So what would you change about the Constitution if you could make one change to it?
I would introduce an amendment to limit terms. I think term limits is a solution whose time has come. We have term limits in other offices, and I think that Congress needs term limits. I say that because I believe that when you look at the history of incumbency, incumbents win. They just do. They have too much of an advantage financially and in other ways over challengers. And I don't think that is the best solution. I think there should be term limits for the Senate, and I think there should be term limits for the House.
Okay. Seems like a good one. Seems like one that a lot of people are talking about, especially recently.
I hope it gets legs.
And this last one is something that I'm personally interested in. What are your thoughts on the Edward Snowden leaks and the NSA and kind of how that progressed?
In my mind, there are two issues here. One is national security, and the other is the programs that the NSA has in place. Those are two different issues. On the one hand, Edward Snowden broke the law, right? He divulged classified information that, by its very definition, is a serious danger to our national security. So he's a criminal an alleged criminal from that point of view, and should be subject to our laws. On the other hand, the things and the programs that he divulged that point to behavior and things that the NSA is doing, that's another issue that deserves debate. Should the NSA have the kind of authority to conduct the kind of programs that it's conducting? That's a separate issue, and that's a good issue, a debate to have. But to justify Snowden's behavior and actions because it generates a debate about the authority of the NSA, I don't necessarily agree with that connection. I don't think you can applaud Edward Snowden just because we are now coming to a realization that the NSA might be too powerful. I don't see that.
Okay. Do you think we would have come to that conclusion, though? Considering pretty much everything touching it is classified. So do you think we would have even come to that conclusion or even started the debate without it, though?
I don't know. I don't know. That's a useful question, but I don't think he can be excused from his actions cannot be excused. I don't believe for a minute that he's an totally altruistic person that did this out of the goodness of his heart. I think he's got other issues going on there. This is my personal opinion.
Okay.
But both issues are good to debate. It's just the connection between the two is not necessarily. I don't necessarily agree with the connection.
Okay. So all fair points. All fair points. I was just interested to hear your perspective since I figured you have more knowledge about the laws surrounding that and policies and those.
Well, yeah, the divulging classified information puts people at risk, and that's what we can't avoid, or we should avoid, I think. And that's you put people in harm's way, and you undercut an awful lot of blood and treasure that goes into our national security by divulging classified information. And I think that to just excuse that kind of activity or behavior is a terrible precedent.
Okay. Well, that's it for the interview. I appreciate you participating. I really liked your answers, and they were thoughtful and made a lot of sense to me, and I learned a lot.
Well, thank you, Ahmed, for the invitation. I really appreciate it.